Okay, today we are presenting part 2 of our Dairy Herd Management Technical Assistance Clean Water Initiative program. In part 2, we're going to discuss some points on forage inventory and successful forage management. The UVM Extension Agricultural Business Team engages with farm, forest, and maple enterprises using valuable planning and educational resources to promote the strong agricultural economy. Our experienced team delivers one-on-one, small group, and online learning opportunities that enhance decision-making and viability. Our programs and research provide direction for key stakeholders to advance initiatives that improve business outcomes in a dynamic agricultural sector. Today, I'm going to pass this off for our first part to Tony Kitsos, and he'll explain a little bit more about the Dairy Herd Management Technical Assistance Program.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Zach. I appreciate the introduction. And as Zach said, we're on to part 2 of our series and talking about forage inventory on a farm and what some of the things are that we'll do. And when Zach gets my slide back there, we can talk about a couple of things that I want to initially kick off the conversation with. And we always want to start to talk about safety first. Having spent 30 years in the dairy industry, it doesn't take a year or two to go by to hear of someone who was killed by a collapsing silage pile while they were out taking a forage analysis to do some nutrition work for the farms. Restful forest birds just popped up on my screen. But anyways, so, you know, it's a really dangerous job to do if you're out there all alone. So you certainly want to be with somebody. Let somebody at the farm know that you're there to take your forage sample and you're there working on their behalf. Stay away from anybody who's driving around in a skid steer or a front end loader, getting ready to feed their cows. They have limited visibility as to what's going on around them. And if you're standing anywhere in the area where they're driving around their bunker, trying to get their feed, you could really present yourself in a dangerous situation if you're not careful. And also another quick good little rule of thumb, when you're taking your sample and standing there having a conversation, stand a little bit further away from that pile than the pile is high. If the pile's 10 feet high, get yourself 10 or 15 feet away. My own personal experience is that silage piles break off, they calve off. And I had one calve off against me one time. It's a bunch of corn silage and it hit me on the shoulder and exploded. So the farmer and I, entrepreneurial people that we are, we weighed it up and it was 1,100 pounds of silage that had hit me on the shoulder. Could have been a lot worse, and he might not have been there. And if I'd have gotten buried by a bunch of more of that, I would have certainly suffocated under that pile. So please be careful when you're out there taking forage samples. Get rid of all the debris and the impediments that could inhibit you from making a quick escape. Again, once that pile starts falling, you got to get out of there. How to take a sample? Well, we look at what the overall size of the bunk face is and try to randomly pick a variety of different areas to choose from that at least represent what the farmer's going to feed for the day. Grab those samples, homogenize them in a bucket, and subsample out of that. Should give you a representative of what the bunk is all about. And if there is somebody there, you can certainly ask a feeder to knock down a bunch of feed for you that looks an awful lot like the pile that's going to be bucketed into the mixer. Go ahead and do it that way. They'll homogenize it nicely for you, and you can subsample certainly from that. Next slide, please, Zach. Bunker silos is just a quick little measurement and some rules of thumb that we use, and the source of this is Penn State. 2004, 2005, they did a study to see just exactly what bunker silo densities were all about on farms. So they randomly selected 22 farms and found that there was a reasonable distribution of packing density that was lighter than it should be, heavier than it should be, or right in the area where it should be, 12 to 14 pounds of dry matter per cubic foot. After outreach education and delivery of some information to those farmers, I went back in a year later to see if their bunk packing habits have changed. And sure enough, we see that we've moved the lower density farms back up into the higher density. And 18 out of the 21 farms had at least as much as they should have for density, if not more. So we can see that outreach education helps when you show people the detriment that poorly packed silage does to the nutritional value as you feed it out. So it's a good little indicator that you really should be packing your bunks with about 14 to 15 pounds of dry matter per cubic foot as a density target. Next slide, Zach. Ag bags, the same kind of thing. You can see along the left-hand column, there are 8-foot, 9-foot, 10-foot, 12 and 14-foot diameter bag sizes of a couple of different lengths, and some varieties of just about how much silage per ton could be found in there at the different moisture contents. So we use these tables all the time when we're doing forage inventories on farms, and hopefully the information is given to the nutritionists so that they can figure out the feeding program going forward. Next slide, Zach. And here's a chart for upright silo capacities as well. The diameter of the silo, 16, 18, 20, or 24 feet in a variety of different heights. This is the least complicated table that I was able to find on the internet. Silo dimensions come in a variety of dimensions. And usually it's within a 20-foot silo. They can range anywhere between 40 feet for a reclaimed silo to 90 or 100 feet for a brand new silo at 20-foot diameter. So something to give you an indication as to how much feed is being stored in your silo for that particular cutting. Next slide, Zach. Questions will always come up on how do we properly maintain silos. We certainly want to clean the face in a bunker silo with a minimum of 6 to 12 inches per day. There's research out there to show that if you feed any less than that, oxygen penetrates that 4 inches or 5 inches and degrades the feed quality, so that the forage sample that you took is not going to be representative of the feed that you're going to feed in the days to come. You've got to clear 6 to 12 inches back. Ag bags and round bales, you certainly want to make sure that if you're cutting back the top of the ag bag as you feed, that's the best thing. What you don't want to do is you don't want to trap snow, dirt, too much moisture in the front. It could throw off the forage analysis, or at least the quality of the feed that you're feeding, at least on ag bags. Maintaining them means to put them on something that allows for pretty decent drainage around them, ag bags and round bales both. If you're not putting drainage around them, you're going to make an awful mud hole when it comes time to feed them out. It takes bucket tractors to move these things with spears and so forth, and it can be a muddy mess and can make for an awful difficult feeding session. So keep it as clean as you possibly can. Feeding strategies adjusted to think about shortages versus surpluses. Inventory will easily tell you at any given time of the year where you are on your forages and where you need to be in order to get through till that next season. And again, work with your nutritionist real close so that the feed program that results takes into account just how much inventory you do have to go through the year. And what are the potential costs associated with not having enough feed. Next slide. Some information about the Dairy Herd Management Technical Assistance Program that we're offering here at UVM Extension. And you can click on the link and get to the website below. Anybody out there have any questions? I see we don't exactly have a big group, but if anyone who's watching this on YouTube does, please feel free to contact us.
And we'll be sending out an email to everybody, and then also posting links on social media for these technical assistance links that we're going to present here. And then now I'm going to transition a little bit to a related topic, but it has to do with our Clean Water Initiative program. This program funds, tracks, and reports on priority projects to restore Vermont's waters. It's a multi-agency collaboration, and it's primarily based on supporting people, farmers with required agricultural practices. In our first presentation, I went over types of farms and the wraps that are applicable to those farms, and we'll send out a reminder and with a link to that first presentation. But in the related topic today, I just wanted to talk about examples of leachate water quality improvements that farms can implement on their farms and receive support from the state. At the Agency of Agriculture's Farmstead Best Management Practice Program, or the BMP program, focuses on improvements on farms for manure storage, compost stack pads, barnyard runoff collection, gutter, ditch clean water diversion, laneway development and stream crossings, exclusion fencing and water facilities, milk house waste collection and treatment, and silage leachate collection and treatment. The BMP program has every year it has an April 1st deadline. Also, I would suggest, if you have something in mind, please contact the Agency of Agriculture directly. These programs are useful for preliminary design and cost estimates that can be completed by a qualified engineer or engineering professional prior to your application. I'll talk about that in the next slide, but for the actual implementation, you can get financial assistance for up to $100,000 and there's up to a 90% cost share, and rates do vary, but you'll be informed about that during the application process. More information can be found at this link that we will send out to you, and we'll also provide a phone number for the Water Quality Division. The Technical Assistance Program they accept applications on a rolling basis, and this program is available to all Vermont farmers for a variety of engineering services, often in preparation for implementation of a structural water quality improvement. The engineering consultations and also design services for a Farmstead BMP project are covered in this technical assistance program, as well as water quality compliance consultations, state permitting consultations, and state variance consultations. It's suggested that you apply for technical assistance as soon as there's a water quality concern on your farm. And what we do for the agricultural business team at UVM Extension, we're able to work with dairy and livestock farmers as well as non-dairy farm owners to assess and plan for business changes to meet water quality goals. Farm owners can work one-on-one with a business educator to evaluate the feasibility and the impact of changes facing the farm and the business. Typical topics that we do provide support for are cash flow and budget analysis, current business situation analysis, assessing the adoption of new practices and new investments, short and long-term strategic planning, farm transfer or exit planning in the case that something arises during this analysis, and referrals to other in-depth business planning programs throughout the state or elsewhere if this is necessary. If you have any more questions, we'll be sharing this link via email, and that will put you in direct contact with our business team. And now I'll pass everything over to Kelsey Meehan.
Thanks, Zach. Hi, I'm Kelsey Meehan, and I work doing technical assistance for small dairies and pasture-based dairies with UVM Extension. Today, I'm going to be talking about, in line with kind of taking a forage inventory, how to take an inventory of your pasture and be able to do some planning for the pasture season ahead. So first, we'll look at how to estimate the dry matter that's available in your pasture, and then use that number to then do some pasture math, either finding out how much pasture you need or how many animals your land can support. You go to the next slide. Yep. So we're going to look at two different ways to estimate the dry matter available in your pasture. There's a ton of different ways to do this, but one simple way, here's a table developed by Jim Garish. And we're going to need this number, like I said, the dry matter, pounds of dry matter per acre, in order to do some further calculations. So ideally, you would be continually estimating your dry matter throughout the grazing season and actually going out into your pastures and looking at the types of plants that are growing and the densities. But you can also do an estimate like we're going to do here today so that you can just do some rough planning for the season ahead. So in this first method of estimating dry matter, pretty simple. You just select the pasture species composition of your pasture in that left-hand column there, and then look across whether the density of that stand is fair, medium, or excellent. So for example, if you had an orchard grass and legume pasture and it was a good density, you'd be looking at 200 to 300 pounds of dry matter per acre inch. And then in order to calculate just the pounds of dry matter per acre, you would need to multiply that by the amount, the inches of pasture that the animals are going to be harvesting. So if the cows are going into a stand when it's 9 inches tall, and they're going to leave when it's 6 inches tall, they'll have harvested 3 inches of pasture. So you'd multiply that 3 inches times, say, this 300 pounds per acre inch, and you would get 900 pounds of dry matter available per acre in that example. Go to the next slide. Another way to estimate the dry matter that's available in the pasture is to use a grazing stick or a pasture stick. And this is a similar concept based on a chart to find the intersection of height and density. And this one, you would actually do this method you do out in the field. So that the pasture stick has 4 sides to it, and each with different information on it. The first thing you would do is walk around your pasture and take the height of the forage at several different locations in the pasture that you're looking at, and then kind of get an average idea of the height using the ruler kind of yardstick side of the grazing stick. And then you would subtract 4 inches from that height if you're going to leave a 4-inch residual, which is recommended for optimum, plant health and keeping that soil covered. So if you measured an average of about 9 inches around the pasture and then subtracted the 4-inch residual you'll leave, that gives you 5 inches of pasture available for grazing. And next you would use the stick to measure the density. So one side of the stick has a chart with dots on it, and you slide that with the chart facing up along the surface of the soil. Then you stand up and look down, and there should be pasture plants covering that chart, and you just count without moving your head how many dots you can see. And then the pasture stick will stay right on there. You can translate that number of dots into an estimated density of the forage you're looking at. So then you multiply that estimated pounds of dry matter per acre inch that you found by the inches available that you found. So if it was 200 pounds of dry matter per acre inch times the 5 inches, you would have 1,000 pounds of dry matter available at that time. And it's dry matter available for grazing. So not the actual total dry matter in that pasture, because you're leaving behind a residual, maybe taking about half of the forage that's out there. And that also accounts for some of the animals, the zone of repugnance around manure and trampling and things like that as well. Go to the next slide, please. So now that you've determined the dry matter that's available per acre, you can do some different pasture math calculations to be able to plan. So first we can work in the direction of asking how much pasture does this given animal group require? And this table, this example was created by Cheryl Cesario at UVM Extension, but it's also taken directly from the application for the FAP, Farm Agronomic Practices Program. It's a state program, and one element of the FAP is payments for rotational grazing. So in that program, they'll pay $25 an acre for all of the acres that are rotationally grazed on your farm, whether they're owned or leased. And the application for that is pretty straightforward, and it's due in June. And if anyone's interested in getting support for filling out that application, I'm happy to help with that. And so in this example, we're asking how much land would be needed to graze 180 milkers and dry cows throughout the season. So the chart is pretty easy to work through. We're looking at the type of livestock, milking and dry cows, number 180 cows, average body weight 1,200 pounds. This fourth line here is a little bit tricky. So it's the estimated dry matter intake as a percentage of body weight. Normally that would be about 3% total, but we're just looking at the DMI from pasture. So here it's 2.5%. We're subtracting 0.5% for the dry matter that these cows are getting from grain in the barn. So an individual cow will need 2.5% times her body weight, 1,200 pounds. She'll need 30 pounds of dry matter per day, and the whole herd will need that 30 pounds times 180 is 5,400 pounds of dry matter per day. The occupancy period is how long the animals will be in a given paddock. So if it was 24 hours, it would be one day. Here, the cows are moving every 12 hours after each milking, so the occupancy period is 0.5. Here's that number that we looked at different ways to calculate it. Line 8, the estimated available forage dry matter in pounds per acre. So here we're saying it's a pretty good stand. It's 1,200 pounds per acre. And then the paddock size is calculated by dividing the amount that's required, 5,400, by the amount that's available, 1,200, and then multiplied by the occupancy period. So if it was 1 day, it would just be that, but because it's half, you're dividing by 0.5, and you get that they need 2.25 acres twice a day. So they need 4.5 acres a day total. So that tells you how much they need for each paddock. But when you translate that into the grazing season in this last section here, you see that the recovery period needed for the pasture changes from May through October. And the recovery period, like in September here, 45 days is much longer than when things are growing very quickly in May, about 21 days. So this last section is a way to find out how long you're going to have to be away from that first paddock before returning to it and have the grass be of an equal density and healthy and not get overgrazed. So in May, and these are just estimated recovery periods and would change with the temperature and the rainfall, but we can use estimates. So in May, first you'd find out the number of paddocks you needed, which would be this 21 divided by half a day, and then you add 1 because that's the paddock that you're in. You can't count that one. So you get 43 paddocks. You multiply that by 2.25 is the size per paddock, and that gives you 98 acres you'll need in May. And then if you follow across and see that in September, that's going to increase up to just over 200 acres that you'll need. So nearly double, or just over double. And there are different ways to address that big change in the amount of acreage you'd need. One would be to graze haylands after you've taken a first or second cut. To address that big change in acreage because of the changing recovery periods. The next slide. And then this slide is just an example of how to work that math in reverse. So starting with the amount of land that you have and asking how many animals you could support on that if you're rotationally grazing. So this calculation holds if you're moving your animals about every 3 days, at least. If you're set stocking, the the numbers wouldn't be the same. You'd get a lot less pasture productivity out, so you'd be able to support fewer animals. But if you're rotationally grazing, you can use this calculation here. So if you had 40 acres, you would then divide, you'd want to calculate how many animals the land could support when the recovery period is longest. So like in September, where we saw that recovery period was about 45 days. So you divide 40 by 45 days plus 1 for the paddock they're in. And that leaves 0.87 acres that are available per day. And then you divide that by the pounds of dry matter available per acre, which is also that same number that we saw how to calculate 2 different ways to give you the pounds of dry matter available per day from this pasture. And then you can translate that into animal units. So an animal unit is about 1,000 pound beef cow or steer. And they would need about 3% of their body weight in dry matter per day, which is about 30 pounds. So 870 divided by 30 and shows that this land could support 29 animal units. But we're looking at heifers, which are a little smaller than an animal unit. So you do that 800 pound heifer divided by the 1,000 pound animal unit, and then divide that into the 29 animal units, gives you 36 heifers for this example of this 40 acre plot that has 1,000 pounds of dry matter available per acre. Yep, and yeah, just my contact info here and a list of some of the things I can offer. So grazing planning work like this, and technical assistance for doing things like the FAP program or other grant funding for grazing and barnyard improvements. Yep, and my contact info is here, and happy to be in touch with anyone with questions or who wants to work on a grazing plan.
Thank you, Kelsey. I've got a question for you. It's a great calculator. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think as far as tools in a toolkit, anybody who works with dairy farms ought to have a tool just like that in their toolkit that they can help farmers work through their questions, which led me right to, what do you see as the biggest stumbling block for farmers to transition into effective pasture management? And I would say not only for those who don't do it very well, but also how can a dedicated grazer use these technologies and forage inventory strategies to improve their farm business?
Well, I think starting with the second question of how can someone who's grazing use these, I think even if you're an excellent grazer, it's always great to have a plan. And so these calculators can then be translated to a grazing plan chart where you can map out, if you know the amount of acreage you need per day and how often you're going to be moving them, you can map out, and you know the pasture makeup of your different fields. You can map out a chart of your plan of where you're planning to go. And then on that same chart, you map out what actually happened. If the rainfall was much less or more than expected, or a certain field grew slower or more quickly than expected, you write in the actual, and then you've got that record for going into the next season. So you can be improving on your grazing, year after year. And as far as challenges for getting started with grazing, I think if a pasture has just been set stocked and that animals have just been in there continually, grass can be, or those pasture plants could be stunted, or there could be weeds that are out competing. And I think there are ways to start slowly. So you could break that down into a few paddocks rather than doing an intensive rotational system where you're moving animals every day. Even just breaking it down into 4, 6, 8 paddocks where the paddocks are starting to get some rest, you can start to see an improvement in the species that are there. And often that'll lead to wanting to do more moves more frequently, because you're starting to see some benefits to the pasture and starting to see that you can be cutting down on feed costs if animals are getting some of that dry matter from pasture.
So we also see land as being a limiting factor that really directs a farmer to make decisions. Does the spreadsheet work backwards where you can plug in, I really only have X number of acres available? And then with some of the standard information, it will tell you how many animals you can put on that size paddock, or does it really only work one way to a solution of how many acres you need?
Yeah, for sure. I think that was the second example of, I have 40 acres, how many heifers can I support? Or I have 200 acres, how many milking cows can I support? Yep, you can definitely look, go in the opposite direction to find the stocking rate, and you can adjust in there the amount of feed that the animals are going to be getting from pasture. So if you've got 100 milkers, but you're going to be feeding them in the barn and they're only getting 25% of their dry matter from pasture, you can work that into the calculation too, or play with that number. I think they're only going to get 10% of their dry matter from pasture, then how many animals can I support on this land? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the important piece for somebody thinking about transitioning to more intense rotational grazing than they already are doing it right now. I think the operative here is there's a spreadsheet that helps you determine what the right level is for a farmer to engage in it so that it's manageable, doable, and repeatable. Because I mean, we all know if you aren't measuring it, you can't manage it. So thank you. I appreciate those answers.
Thanks, Tony.
Zach, anything more we want to cover?
I think that's it for now. We will be announcing our February and March dates very soon, dates and times, just as reminders to everybody. We'll also send out an email with a recording of this this video and useful links for people to work with. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Other than that, we'll wrap it up.
Great. Well, thanks. And if you're watching the video, we sure do appreciate that too. And go to the links and get in touch with us if you have any questions about Dairy Business Innovation Center and the technical assistance or the Clean Water Initiative program. Thank you all.